RugbyRenegade.com, the #1 online strength and conditioning program for rugby. Are you ready to get bigger, stronger, fitter, and faster and dominate your opposition? Welcome to the Rugby Renegade Podcast, where we build machines.
Hello and welcome to episode 5 of the Rugby Renegade Podcast. My name is Jamie Bain and today I interview Ron McKeefery, Head of Strength and Conditioning at the University of Eastern Michigan and author of CEO Strength Coach. This is definitely one for any budding S&C coaches out there. Ron's book is probably a Bible for you career-wise now. I've read it since speaking to him, and there's so many nuggets of information you can take away and kind of things you wouldn't have thought of when you're starting on the road of being a strength coach. But also loads of training information. Ron currently works with all different sports at University of Eastern Michigan, and but mainly with football. So there's loads we can take, American football, loads we can take from that as rugby players. So give it a listen, and I'm sure you're going to enjoy it. Ron, thanks for coming on the Rugby Renegade Podcast. It's a great pleasure to have you with us.
Jamie, thanks for having me, man. Excited to be here.
I think why don't we start by you sort of telling us a bit about your background, how you got into strength and conditioning, who you've worked with in the past, and your current role now.
Sure. It's a long story. I'll try to give you the Reader's Digest version. Got into coaching. I was a self-made athlete, much like most of all of us were, and found the weight room as to be the place where I could close the gap a little bit in terms of talent, things like that. So worked really hard and went to school to be a doctor and decided that wasn't the direction for me, and was searching, and somebody suggested strength and conditioning, and something that I had just a natural passion for with myself as an athlete, and made it pretty clear path there to go that direction. And so I worked, I ended up getting an internship with the Kansas City Royals, and worked a series of internships that turned into part-time assistants and assistant roles with Kansas City Royals and Tampa Bay Buccaneers, NFL, and went over to NFL Europe as a head strength coach. Came back, worked as a head strength coach at the University of South Florida, which was a startup program that we were able to take from pretty much nothing to a number 2 ranking at one point, and 6 bowl games and things like that. Left there, took a job with Army Special Operations. Was there briefly before I took a job with University of Tennessee, a major college football SEC program, and we didn't get it done on the field, and we had a great thing going in the weight room. We did get it done on the field, and so we all got let go, and went to the Cincinnati Bengals, and then on to my current role as the director of strength and conditioning at Eastern Michigan University, where I'm back playing, I'm back working for the head coach that was my head coach my senior year in college. And so really cool dynamic to be able to go back and work with him in a different capacity, and working to build something strong here at Eastern.
Yeah, that must be great. One of the big things is that relationship between head coach and head S&C. How has that sort of relationship evolved? Obviously, it's different with different people, but how's it evolved over your career?
Yeah, the obviously the role of a strength and conditioning coach, especially over here in the States and at the college level, with all the NCAA rules and the limits that are placed upon you in terms of hours that you can be around the athletes and things like that, the strength coach becomes a very integral part of not just the performance enhancement aspect, but mostly the team building and the accountability and all the things that typically would be done by the head football coach. But with recruiting and the limitations and the rules, the head coaches aren't allowed around the team nearly as much. And so through the years, through that dynamic or through those situations, just naturally you become very close with the head football coach, and our role is to carry out their vision and their mission and do our best to provide our athletes with the framework that our head coaches are that are working towards. And so Through the years, I've always been close to the head coaches. It's really nice to be with a guy that, was a first-time head football coach, 26 years old, when I was a 21-year-old senior, and so we're like brothers. I love the guy and really respect him, and sometimes we fight like brothers too, but but we have a great relationship, and I've been able to really blend a philosophy that's been years and years of building that stemmed from those first interactions with him as a player.
Yeah, definitely. That sounds great. So talk a little bit more specifically about your role at Eastern Michigan. Are you predominantly working with a football team and then with other sports as well then?
Yeah, I'm the director of the department, and so I oversee all of our sports. But the primary responsibility is working with American football and coordinating the strength and conditioning program for them.
Yeah. So obviously we're specifically focused on rugby, Rugby Renegade, and having said that, looking at American football, we can learn a lot from them because they've got some phenomenal athletes, some really big guys who are really, they've got great footwork. They're very dynamic. How do you create such athletes? I guess what I'm trying to ask.
It's what's funny is I think that especially the good strength coaches, they're looking at rugby as well. From the other perspective, saying same thing, how you develop such great athletes, and it's really cool to see the crossover between the two sports in a lot of respects. I think for us, it really stems from trying to create programs that are specific, in terms of their position, their where they're at as an athlete. And then obviously with their injury history, because it is a violent game, creating programs that are as specific as you can, understanding that there's a general amount of attributes, that are required to be robust enough to play the game, and so, you want your linemen who, in major college football and in the NFL, you want your linemen to, they're 6'5" to 6'8". They're 300, they're 290 to 340 pounds. You want them to be as fast as they can possibly be, and so those principles to develop speed, they don't change because he's 6'8", 320, as compared to that defensive back, but the volume and the intensity and things, they do change, and vice versa for your defensive backs or your wide receivers, your skill positions. You want them to be as big and as strong as they can possibly be, but still maintain their speed and the attributes that are needed to play the game. And so, we really work. I think the challenge, obviously, is we have 8 hours to in college to work with our athletes. In the NFL, you're limited in the number of weeks that you can work with them in the off season. And so you have to become an expert in speed and strength and power, balance, coordination, kinesthetic awareness, skill acquisition. All these attributes you have to combine and get into an 8 hour time frame. And so you really got to be efficient with what you're doing. And so there's a general level of fitness, and then you try to become specific in terms of what they need individually to develop themselves for their position.
Yeah, definitely. So I'm trying to get a kind of an idea of your training philosophy. So obviously that's quite difficult. It's a broad subject, but if you're trying to improve power, how do you go about that? Have you come from an Olympic lifting, sort of favour the Olympic lifts, or are you more into jump squatting or things like that, etc.?
Yeah, I definitely I've come from an Olympic lifting background. I trained and competed in the Olympic lifts early on in my career, and so they are a major part of what we do. If you ask what philosophy or things along those lines that I am, I routinely talk about how I'm a principle-based strength coach, not a philosophy-based strength coach. I think when you limit and pigeonhole yourself to a specific philosophy, you really lose out on things that are fantastic ways of going about developing speed and strength and power and all those things, and so things like overload and progression and balance development, are all principles that, whether or not you are conjugate or powerlifting or tier system or, cube method or whatever, whatever method you want to throw out there, we can have a conversation about overload. Specifically to develop power for us, that starts with the Olympic lifts, and we do use a conjugate periodization model where we're going to focus on a max effort movement in the day and a dynamic effort movement in the day. And so in our dynamic effort movements, we're trying to develop power in an upper and lower and total body way. But I think we're, again, trying not to be cookie cutter. I mean, it would be easy for me to say, okay, on Monday, during this week, we started our lift with our total body movement with a hang clean, but if that athlete was injured, they have a wrist, an ankle, or something along those lines, that could have been a single leg box jump, that could have been Vertimax, that could have been, TRX squat jumps. It could have been a lot of different things to develop power that way. But we'll keep each day we'll train in a dynamic fashion using in Tennessee and Cincinnati and places like that I had a Tendo unit or an elite form or something along those lines. We would measure velocity and do it that way. Here we don't have the resources for that, so it's simply moving the bar as fast as you can.
Yeah,
and and having a set percentage based off of we kind of use Prilipin's chart and kind of an RPE type of fashion as well.
Yeah, I think you're right what you say about the principles and some of those kind of training programs, for want of a better word, that you described. The reason a lot of those are so successful because they're based on all those principles. So you're right, you don't want to kind of pigeonhole yourself into one thing, and on the other hand, you could be in a different situation where one of them would work better, but it's still based on those principles.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So touched on sort of velocity-based training. I know you said you haven't got a Tendo unit or a gym aware or anything like that in East Michigan. So is it just simply motivating them to lift as explosive as you can? Like a lot of our athletes won't have access to that sort of thing. So I think it's really important that they understand that they need, for rate of force development and things and power, they need to be moving as explosively as possible.
Right. Yeah. No. We've played around, of course, with a stopwatch and trying to put some actual times to it. But the reality is in those environments, sometimes logistic outweigh physiology. Unfortunately, and so oftentimes it does just ultimately get down to trying to motivate them to move the bar as fast as you can and being in communication with your athlete. To monitor fatigue and then making your adjustments. But there's so much research out there right now, especially in velocity-based training, that you've been at, Dr. Brian Mann at Missouri and some of these, Dan Baker and Ashley Jones, they're putting out such great stuff that for the most part, they're able to, put it into a percentage-based approach and pretty much get it dialed in on where you should be in terms of set reps and intensity.
Yeah, definitely. A question we kind of ask all our guests on the podcast is, what do you think athletes, or what do you think is the biggest mistake athletes make when it comes to strength and conditioning?
I think the first mistake that a lot of athletes make is that they're closed-minded and they have an idea of what they think works for them. They've had some success, and the reality is, especially if you're talking professional rugby or a higher level, college or professional athletics around the world, what happens is that as a high schooler, when they had testosterone running through their ears, they saw results doing anything. and so they could have walked in a weight room and they would have got stronger because of the hormones and things along those lines. And so typically they'll align themselves with a philosophy or an approach, and sometimes they're resistant to changing that as they age. So I think being closed-minded is the first thing. I think the second thing is I think that I think people have a hard time having difficult conversations and really defining what good is. And so it's why we coach. I mean, the premise of why we coach is being able to lead people to an area or to a place that they have not been before, that they couldn't achieve on their own, and so really understanding that there is another level to wherever they're at. I mean, wherever they're at in their development, there is always another level, and being able to allow themselves to be pushed to that point, I think is another mistake.
Yeah, and obviously motivation's a big part of that, and the strength and conditioning coach obviously has a massive role in that regard. How do you sort of approach that with your athletes?
I think it starts with, it sounds cliche, but I mean, it's the old adage of they don't care how much you know until you know how much you care. I mean, I think you got to develop a relationship with your athletes. For us, that starts with what we call their why meeting. We just had two players that just started, we just started our summer program 2 days ago, and, we had two new players that came in that transferred in from other schools, and that's exactly what we did. We sat down, we asked them what their why was, and so asking them questions as if football was, if the sport that you were playing was taken away from you, what would you do? And so we had one of those players who said his dream is to take a sailboat around the world. I would have never known that about him. Would have never guessed that, if we didn't have that conversation, and so it gives us kind of a human element to be able to lean on later on down the line, and so finding out what they would do and being able to encourage them. I think, people so many times in especially high level sport, the relationships are so much transactional, where they come in, if they come in and do right, it's a great relationship. If they come in and do wrong, it's a very negative relationship, and it's what have you done for me lately? And when you really take the time to show that you care about them, not just the 4 years that they're going to be there or the year that they're going to be there, then you can get them to buy into you on another level and be able to challenge them in a different way. And so we tell our athletes all the time, we got them for 2 hours a day. They have 22 hours to mess up everything that we did. And if we're not involved in those 22 hours somehow, some way, then we're fighting a losing battle every time we come to work. And, we're all competitive, and I don't like fighting losing battles. So we want to make sure that we're fighting a winning battle. So we need to be involved. We get involved, and we try to find lots of ways. We challenge our staff and ourselves to find lots of ways to interact with our athletes outside of the weight room. One big way that we do that is we try each phase. And so for example, for this summer, we every month, once a month, we'll do a special workout, and we usually do that in our unload week. And in that week, we'll take them. Sometimes we take them off site, sometimes we do fun things. But we try to provide them with a life experience. And so, for example, last year we took our athletes to one of the Great Lakes. In Michigan here, we have these big Great Lakes that they look like oceans. And so a lot of people have never seen them. And a lot of these kids have never even seen an ocean before. And so, to see that is a life experience. And so we took them to the Great Lake, and we camped on the beach, and we ran the sand dunes in the morning, and some of them never ran sand dunes before, and so again, we got a player from Indianapolis, Indiana, the middle of the country, who's never seen a body of water like that, never seen sand dunes, and still to this day, he's from inner city Indiana. He comes up to me almost every day and asks me when we're doing that again, because he had such a great time. And so when you provide life experiences for athletes and you connect with them as a person, then when I go and in that why meeting, we also set their goals, and it's not my goals for them. It's their goals. They're telling me what they want to do. I'm showing them, based off what they're telling me they want to do, what the definition of good is for that. Then I'm able to hold them accountable outside of the weight room and inside the weight room to another level. And usually they'll respond because you've taken that time to get to know them on that level.
Yeah, definitely, and that's one of the things Ashley Jones said when he was a guest, that he sits down with the players one-on-ones and says, look at the best the best rugby player in your position, and see what they've got and what you need to get to that level. I think that's definitely a good way of going about it. It's great to hear you say earlier that you guys look from the States look at rugby players and are quite impressed with the athletes we have. That's
Sure.
Great to hear. What else do you sort of see when you look at rugby as a sport and as the individual athletes as well?
I think the sport of rugby, especially in international strength and conditioning, I think there's such a great emphasis, and rightfully so, placed on the sports science element of and allowing that to drive not just your strength and conditioning, but also the practice schedule and the work week. And especially in the States, we're still, because we still do a lot of things because that's what we've always done. Approach, and this is what's worked in the past, and not really letting the science drive the training, and so been very impressed with that. Been very impressed with the amount of data and research that's being done by coaches and then practitioners, and so you're getting real data as opposed to in a laboratory type setting with non-athletic populations. And so I think those two things are probably the things that I've respected the most, seen from the strength and conditioning community, the rugby strength and conditioning community, and things that I know myself and other strength coaches that have a global approach are really taking and pulling from as much as we can.
Yeah. Oh, that's great to hear. Also, rugby in America, how's that developing? Obviously, the Sevens being in the Olympics this year has been a big thing, having more funding to it. How's things going? I know there's a sort of pro rugby tournament has started recently as well. How's it all going there?
Yeah, there's the Eagles, rugby team, and I know that there's been a big tournament in Las Vegas the last couple of years that has been a global tournament there. And I think it's honestly, I think it's an untapped market. I think it's there's tremendous upside and potential for rugby in the United States. I mean, you just think about it. I mean, most of the athletes that are built like rugby players, built like football players in other parts of the world, that's what they do. They grow up to be rugby players, and that's their only vision, the only thing that they see themselves doing. Here, most Americans are going to grow up wanting to be a football player first. And then they don't even sometimes even know about rugby or know it's even similar, and so it's definitely with the Eagles and with Sevens being in the Olympics and even movies like Invictus and things like that, it's definitely becoming more well known, and there's starting to be a real grassroots approach that's being taken at university. I think most universities now have a club team, which means that they'll it's kind of an unfunded by the university, but they'll play a competitive schedule. And there's a few teams and universities that have talked about adding it as a sport, and so I think there's, like I said, I think there's tremendous potential. I think it's a sport that. Quite frankly, we have not, as a country, we have not done a great job of participating on the global stage at, and honestly, I think that especially our football players that weren't making it, to play professional football, decided to play some rugby, I think we could be fairly competitive, globally.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's something the rest of the world kind of lives in fear about, that if America really did take it seriously and those players, like I said, who didn't make it in the NFL actually applied themselves to rugby, they could be quite a dangerous team. Moving on, and I've got to confess, I haven't actually got a copy of your book. It's one I've been meaning to get for a while. A few people have recommended it to me, and I've seen it's had great reviews from a lot of top S&Cs. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that CEO strength coach and what's the idea behind it?
Yeah, absolutely. No, and I'm happy to send you a copy as well. But the book, it really, when I first got into the profession, this is almost 20 years ago now. It was really important to me to, just like all of us, we're competitive athletes. I wanted to be a success. I wanted to be one of the best, and so I really kind of sat back and researched what the best strength coaches were doing, and what it meant to be a success in this profession. And so going through a coaching change, there was an opportunity for there to be some vulnerability in my security as a strength coach. And so that year I was really, I ended up getting retained. We had a coach that got fired. I got retained by the new coach. But in that year, I was blinded by kind of anger and things like that I was thinking about getting out of the profession and kind of going and starting my own performance or something. And so I read a bunch of business books. One of the business books that I read was called The E-Myth Revisited. And it was about, it was a business book that was really kind of showing, an entrepreneur how to create a franchise type of model. And in that, they talked about to be a successful business owner, you had to be three things. You had to be a technician, a great technician. You had to be a great manager, and you had to be a great entrepreneur. And it just really hit me like a ton of bricks that those are the same three things that you have to be, that those successful strength coaches had to be a success in this profession. You have to be a great technician. You have to know, we're talking power. You need to know how to develop and express power. You need to know how to develop and express strength. You need to know how to develop and express speed. You have to know that technical information and be able to, practically apply it to your athletes. And that's, and so that's the first step. And so what happens as strength coaches is we like to lift weights, or we were athletes, and it became natural to us. And so because we like to lift weights, people start to kind of gravitate to us, and we naturally start to teach people to lift weights. And when we teach people to lift weights, then all of a sudden, all we're doing research-wise and everything that we're doing from a strength and conditioning standpoint is going to conferences and reading books and magazines and journals and everything about how to develop all those attributes to play sport. But as being a head strength coach, and myself and others, once you become a head strength coach, or you become in charge of a team, the writing the workouts and the coming up with the plan, that's the easy part. The hard part is managing people, managing time, managing resources, managing, people. And so, in your undergraduate work, or, I don't know what your undergraduate degree was in, but, most strength coaches have an exercise science related degree. We didn't take classes that were about management and business and organizational skills and all these things, and so we kind of, it's kind of where the rubber meets the road is whether or not you're going to be able to stay in this profession because you know how to manage teams and the athletes and the coaches and all that, budgets. And so, that was something that I see it every year. I see coaches getting opportunities because they're good technical coaches, but then when they get there, they flame out or fail or get fired because they don't have the skill set to really stay there and work with people. And then the third part is you have to be a great entrepreneur. You have to be forward thinking. You have to constantly be sharpening the sword. I mean, that's why I'm assuming that you started this podcast. That's why I started my podcast. I wanted to talk to the best in the world and constantly learn from people as much as I possibly could, because I don't ever want to be the same coach from year to year. I always want to improve. And if you don't do that and you just stay, kind of in your lane and don't really learn a lot, then, the grass is always greener. Your athletes are going to look elsewhere. Your coaches are going to look elsewhere. the whole deal. And for those coaches that have been in this field for a significant amount of time, it's not if, it's when you get fired. And the unfortunate part is, as a community, we have not done a great job of defining how you evaluate a strength coach. But the reality is right now, it pretty much just comes down to whether or not the coaches or the players like you, and so, you can do a great job in the weight room, but if you don't get enough wins, then you're going to be on the street.
Yeah.
And so from an entrepreneur standpoint, you have to create streams of income, and you have to plug leaks in your finances and things like that, and really have a good plan and be able to provide for your family if you're going to stay in this field for a significant amount of time. And so in writing the book, I wanted to write a book that educated those young coaches and coaches in general, because I was a head strength coach for 12 years before I ever got fired. I was living in kind of my own world, that this strength and conditioning bubble where I never thought about personal branding or time management or streams of income or communication tools and all these types of things. It wasn't until then that I figured out, that I learned that those are major things that will keep you in the profession that you love and that you've worked so hard to be in.
Yeah. Yeah. And you're right. We started the podcast, to give great information to our members, but it's turned out to be great for me to, to speak with like-minded people and, pick the brains of people like yourselves. And also, you're right. Anyone can get a sports science degree, but it's that people experience of, working, as we were talking before, developing that relationship with the coaches, with the players, and getting that extra little bit out of people. So you're exactly right, and it's commendable that you've written a book that really helps people work on that, because I don't think a lot of other people have. So well done for that.
Appreciate that.
Probably last big question. Where do you see, or what do you see the kind of big changes in strength and conditioning in the future? Is it more technology, or is it sort of just using technology better?
Yeah, technology is obviously a very important aspect, and I think I just asked this question the other day on one of my podcasts as well, because I don't want to, and this was my my disclaimer when I asked it. I don't want people just to simply say we need to continue to improve the science and the technology and continue to grow there to where all of a sudden we're RoboCops and we're wearing all this stuff, and I think where I see the field going, and I think that the thing that is what the challenge to all our strength coaches is a couple things. One, I think we have to create a degree-seeking program in strength and conditioning. I think there's a lot of different degrees out there that are getting close, but most people Frankenstein their learning experience. They're a biology major like I was, or they're an exercise science major, or they're a kinesiology major, or biomechanics, or whatever. But there's really not a degree that's specifically in strength and conditioning, and because of that, there's not really any kind of set base on a base level of knowledge that everybody has to have. I think the second thing is that we have to continue to find ways to educate our employers on how they should evaluate us. The challenge with strength coaches is that, it's easy to say, okay, well, if they bench more, they squat more, they run faster, they jump higher, then the strength coach is good. Well, we don't always, as strength coaches, we don't always want to be judged on what our athletes are doing from a performance standpoint, because they might have gone and smoked their entire body weight in dope, or they might have gone and not slept the night before they tested, or they might have eaten like crap. There's a lot of external variables that affect how somebody performs. And same thing with injuries. You'd say injury prevention. Well, rugby is a violent game, and American football is a violent game, and so there's going to be injuries. But there's no way of quantifying how many injuries we prevent, by the stuff that we do, and so we need to continue to provide our employers with how we should evaluate strength coaches. I think the third thing is that we need to continue to find and explore all the different ways that strength coaches can, that we can develop jobs in the profession. So if you think back, 10 years ago, 5 years ago, really, tactical strength and conditioning really wasn't a thing. All of a sudden now it's blowing up, right? There's tactical strength and conditioning everywhere. MMA strength and conditioning really wasn't a thing 5 years ago. Now it's a major career for a lot of people, and so we need to continue to explore the different ways that we can use our skill set to develop our communities, and I think two ways of doing that are getting the degree seeking programs, where it's going to get people that are in the educational space constantly looking for ways to develop that and develop research and challenge and thought-provoking type stuff to younger generations. And I think that we need to, as our profession, we need to really challenge our organization. So, overseas, the UKSCA or ASCA, or over here, the NSCA. We need to challenge those organizations, CSCCA, to really push for a strength coach in every high school. I would think that would be a fantastic breeding ground for strength coaches. It's definitely needed from a liability and risk assessment standpoint with youthful athletes. It's going to limit a lot of injuries that we see at the higher levels by having better education at the lower levels. And I think it gives a place for our aging strength coaches to go as well, when they're not when you don't necessarily want to move after you've been fired from a job. You'd like to stay in a certain community. Yeah. And so I think there's lots of things that we can be doing as a strength and conditioning community outside of just let's figure out how to use GPS better, or HRV, or polar heart rates, or whatever.
Yeah, That's really interesting points. I think you're right about sort of not sending old S&C coaches to high school, but sometimes they say the best coaches should be with the kids. If you get them a good training experience for them at a young age, then it gives them greatest potential later on in their athletic career, or just general life as well. So I think that's a really interesting point you made. So where can people learn more about you, Ron?
Yeah, Jamie, I'm all over. I try my best to be out there, and this is coming from a guy that again, probably 10 years ago, if you would have told me that you sent me a tweet, I probably would have punched you in your face. I'm not, I wasn't, I really wasn't into the whole social media thing and all that as a strength coach. But I thought that, but I've learned that was a mistake. I think those are tools that, again, if used just like any tool in your weight room, if you use it properly, can be very, very powerful. And so, I'm on social media. My Twitter is @RMcKeefery, McKeefery. That's a good starting place. My website, it's ronmckeefery.com. I have a podcast that I actually have two podcasts. One that I interview strength coaches from around the world, much like you do. And another one that's called Ask Coach Mac, where I take questions from people and answer those on the air as well. And so those would be the places to start to kind of to connect with me.
Yeah, that's great, and we'll put links for those on our site as well, so people with Rugby Renegades can link straight through from our site. Ron, thank you very much for your time. It's been an absolute pleasure. I'm sure our members have got loads of information they can apply, and I've learnt a great deal myself as well. So thanks very much.
I appreciate it, man. Thanks for having me on, and for everybody listening. I know from personal experience how much it takes and goes into putting things like this on. And so, Jamie, it's a testament to you and your willingness to give back to the community. And I would encourage everybody that's listening just to take a moment and leave a review for them and send them just some encouragement, because it takes special people to do this. And I appreciate your efforts, man.
Brilliant. Thanks, Ron. Well, there you go. Another great interview. We'd like to thank Ron for giving us his time and sharing all his knowledge. I'm sure you can get a huge amount from that, whether you're just a rugby player or you're a budding S&C coach. Lots of lessons there. And thanks to you for listening. Again, more to come. Stay in touch with us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. And of course, subscribe to us on iTunes, Stitcher, TuneIn or SoundCloud and give us some awesome reviews. And we'll keep these coming. Thanks and see you soon.
Thanks for listening to the Rugby Renegade Podcast. For more quality rugby strength and conditioning information, check us out at rugbyrenegade.com. Rugby Renegade, building machines.